by not designating Nigeria a country of particular concern.
The U.S. government cares less about protecting Christians than it does about other groups. When people attack or speak out against Muslims, they are called this. When people attack or speak out against Jews, they're called this. When someone says anything people in the alphabet community don't like, they're called this. But what do you call people who hate and attack Christians? Why is that?
A news blackout is a situation in which government or other authority imposes a ban on the publication of news on a particular subject. Why is this significant? Let me get to this for you because there's something happening today in the world, in the culture. It is highly being neglected, very few in the news media platforms or even talking about this. So recently, this happened in the month of November, right after the attack in Israel by Hamas on October 7th. House approves nearly $14.5 billion in military aid for Israel. Biden's vows to vote the GOP approach. All right, I'm not saying anything about this yet, but we're going to come back and address the significance of what this means in the light of our subject today. Now, this is Chuck Schumer, who is somewhat elated with joy because the House has recently voted to support more funds to Ukraine and also securing the border at the same time. So we have a domestic issue as well as a foreign issue combined. What does this actually have to do with what we're talking about today? You just keep watching. I'm going to make the application here. Let's keep listening to this. Let's take a listen to this and let's talk some more.
Well, thank you very much. It was a very good meeting and a very positive meeting. There was a large amount of agreement around the table that we must do Ukraine and we must do border. There was tremendous focus on Ukraine and an understanding that if we don't come to Ukraine's aid, that the consequences for America around the globe would be nothing short of devastating. And within a year, we would be on our back foot doing all kinds of things that we wouldn't want to do.
Okay, there's a lot that could be said about this, and I'm not going to get into the politics of this, okay? But let's leave this matter alone. All I can simply say, if you want to understand the destiny of Ukraine right now, take a look at what we did to Iraq. And you compare and contrast, the story is abundantly clear of what's going to happen again. Anyway, with that being said, this is where I wanted to get to. Armenian Christians flees as Azerbaijan takes over. This is a major news blackout. How come you're not hearing about this? Do you want to know how many people we're talking about? It's over 120,000 Armenian Christians who are currently being persecuted for their faith. Yeah, we understand. What happened on October 7th to Israel by Hamas and what they did in the land, which turned into a war in Gaza, was bad. By all means, I think Israel have the right to defend themselves. Do I agree with the amount of bloodshed? No, I'm a Christian. I wish there was no wars, period. I wish it was all peace. But we live in a sinful world. I get it. So I'm not going to try to pick side here. That's not the point of my video. Neither am I trying to make a political statement. It's bigger than that. All I'm simply saying is this. If we feel the need to help Israel in this country, if we feel the need to help Ukraine in this country with taxpayer dollars, why isn't these Christians being considered? That's my argument. Why are the lives of 120,000 Christians being attacked by Islamic forces does not even make the news? Why is that? Is it because they're Christians? Some are going as far as to say this is an ethnic cleansing is happening. This is happening as we speak. And by the way, this has been happening for about 9 months.
On October 7th of this year, Hamas launched a surprise attack against Israel. And you might remember that almost immediately after that attack, about 2 days later, the Israeli defense minister came out and he announced a total blockade of the entire Gaza Strip ahead of a ground invasion. This meant that the fuel, the water, and the electricity were no longer available to flow into the region. Now, for the ordinary Gazan citizen, meaning the mother, the kid, and the husband who runs a little shop, this was a total disaster. And internationally, we saw many news reports covering exactly that, the effect that this blockade was having on ordinary people. However, as important as it is to cover what's happening over in Gaza, well, there's another blockade that's been ongoing for the entirety of the year, which has had no media coverage at all. That's because, despite a near total media blackout, over in the Caucasus region, 120,000 Armenian Orthodox Christians have been under blockade by their Muslim neighbors for pretty much the entirety of the year 2023. Specifically, for 9 full months, these Armenian Christians were being quite literally starved to death by a blockade that was imposed on them by their neighbors, the government of Azerbaijan.
I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to go deeper into this subject on that particular video as well, so you can hear and learn some more about that. Let's move to the next part of our video.
Christians are no longer safe anywhere.
We now shift our focus to Nigeria, where a woman has been beaten to death and set on fire on college premises.
Shouldn't be doing this.
Your name, sir, please? You guys are tough people. This is wrong. No. Don't take my time.
I heard a preacher tell me before, the truth sounds like hate to those who hate the truth.
This latest incident, which mainstream media either ignored or gave little to no coverage, proves that.
Over 140 Christians were killed in Nigeria by jihadists over the Christmas holiday, marking another deadly weekend in West Africa as Christians are practically being hunted for sport. And while the world looks the other way, Nigeria was marked the worst country in the world for Christian persecution last year, according to the International Christian Concern.
Meanwhile, the United States government deliberately took Nigeria off the list of countries of particular concern, which is a designation by the United States Secretary of State of a country that is known to violate religious freedom flagrantly.
With reactions trailing the United States' decision to remove Nigeria from the list of countries blacklisted for engaging in violation of religious freedom. Well, in a statement issued on Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken announced 10 countries of particular concern, including Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia, among others, for having engaged in or tolerated systematic and egregious violations of religious freedom. Well, in December 2020, the U.S. had listed Nigeria among the countries blacklisted, a position Nigeria's Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, described as a case of honest disagreement between the two nations on the causes of violence in Nigeria. Well, let's take some reactions. Jonathan posed a question to U.S. President Joe Biden and the United States Embassy in Nigeria, asking, what is the criteria for removing Nigeria from the list when Christians are killed daily across Nigeria, especially in Kaduna? Well, I think someone has been compromised.
Absolutely. Why should Nigeria be removed from the list when hundreds of lives were lost during Christmas by the group that hates Christians?
Overall, I think 12 of the recommendations for countries of particular concern that Yusuf recommended, the State Department has also accepted those recommendations, but on some key ones, such as India and Nigeria, they did not. And that gives us great concern, particularly when it comes to Nigeria, with, as you said at the top of this piece, with over 200 people killed in Nigeria in and around Christmas, including a minister and his entire family in Plateau State. Plus the many other religious killings and the religious violence that has gone on in Nigeria over the years. And we believe that the State Department made a huge mistake in it this year, as it did last year, by not designating Nigeria a country of particular concern.
The U.S. government cares less about protecting Christians than it does about other groups. When people attack or speak out against Muslims, they are called this. When people attack or speak out against Jews, they're called this. When someone says anything people in the alphabet community don't like, they're called this.
Yeah. What about the Christians? Do they get any form of societal title or label for what is happening to them?
But what do you call people who hate and attack Christians? Why is that? This is a battle between light and darkness. Satan knows who he hates, Jesus Christ, and he's going after those who believe in him.
So from my understanding of the stats, a Christian is killed every 2 hours in Nigeria. It's astounding. Why don't you just tell us what is going on? Why are Christians being hunted down and killed and kidnapped and their churches burned in Nigeria specifically?
Well, first of all, it depends on who you ask. If you ask the Christian community in Nigeria, and this is the largest country in Africa, the biggest economy in Africa, a democracy nonetheless, that's basically 50% Christian, 50% Muslim. And every single Christian in the country will tell you they're being targeted because they're Christians.
Right.
And the unmentionable things are happening to women. Children are being killed in grotesque ways. Every church they can find is being burned down. Whole villages being burned down. It is basically 100 times worse than anything you've seen. In fact, the 140 people that were killed over Christmas, since that happened, over the last week, another 4 villages have been annihilated entirely. So if you ask the Christians, they say we're being targeted because we're Christians. They want to ethnically, religiously cleanse us. If you ask the Department of State, they're going to say this has nothing to do with religion. In fact, just this last week, the Department of State reversed yet again a Trump administration decision to designate Nigeria as one of the world's foremost persecutors of religious people, of Christians, because they believe the reason why this is happening is, wait for it, climate change.
Yes.
You serious? You can't be serious.
Because they believe the reason why this is happening is, wait for it, climate change.
Climate change? Really?
Yes, I saw that. I saw that in the AP. One of my colleague Pete Hegseth showed me the article where the AP said this is happening because of climate change. It's absolutely astounding, first of all, that the Trump administration first designated Nigeria, rightfully so. They called it the worst violator, Nigeria, the worst violator of religious freedom in the world. And just as 140 Christians were massacred over Christmas, and we know 52,000 in Africa since 2009 have been killed, now the Biden administration just this month decides to reverse that, and now the media and the State Department are saying it's climate change.
It is mind-blowing that the American government and several mainstream media are blaming climate change for terrorist groups attacking Christians in Nigeria. How low can they go?
It's not just mind-blowing, it is stupidity.
Politics aside, people who are losing their lives and homes are humans, and we should acknowledge that and not blame climate change.
Our government is being blind to this, the media is too, but there aren't enough Catholic and Christian leaders like yourself out there bringing attention to it.
This is why we're talking about this, because this is something oftentimes you don't hear about. Nobody's bringing attention to it. They're not talking about it on their channels. So you got to find places where this is being discussed. Why does this discussion need to take place? Because this is how you bring about change. When people get to hear what's going on, then they can advocate for different policies to bring about change to the situation in and of itself. But if there is a black hole in the media and the Christians are silent and people are not saying anything about anything, how are we supposed to defend this? Are we supposed to just accept the fact that this is just happening because, well, the Bible says we're going to be persecuted by all nations and for his name's sake? Yeah, that's true. That doesn't necessarily mean you sit back and let it happen.
We really thank you for doing that, and we hope others will continue to speak for the plight of those Christians in Africa.
This news reporter makes a valid point. If our religious leaders, especially those within the evangelical community, would speak out against the attacks on Christians just as they speak out in support of Israel, things may not be this bad in Nigeria.
That was my point. That was my point in this. And there's a whole nother discussion about that, whether or not we should be engaged in the nature of this war. And there's also another war brewing between China and Taiwan. So there's a high possibility we might shift into that as well. I don't know if we're ready for more funding of wars. And again, there are wars happening all around the world. I find it very interesting that the United States only is funding certain types of wars, certain countries. So I don't necessarily know the interest. Maybe there's a spiritual component to this because there's a perspective that Israel is still God's special people. And listen, I got a video coming up about that because we have to address this from a biblical perspective. This doesn't necessarily mean we should not stand and support Israel by any means. That's not the point of my argument at all. All I'm simply saying is if we can spend $14.5 billion in support of a country, a foreign nation, which is not our very own, and we claim to be a God-fearing nation, there's 124,000 Armenian Christians being persecuted, while there were 140 something thousand that were maimed and murdered during Christmas. And this doesn't make the news. Neither is there any funds going to support these Christians. I begin to question everything that we represent as a nation. That's my argument.
Nigeria. These religious leaders influence our political leaders in many ways. Our Republican leaders pushed for over $14 billion in aid to Israel. While Americans have different views about taxpayers' money funding wars in foreign countries, if our leaders would push for a fraction of that amount to help defeat the enemy,
A fraction.
countries, if our leaders would push for a fraction of that amount to help defeat the enemies of the gospel of Jesus Christ, more Christian lives would be saved. In 2022, Deborah Emmanuel Yakubu, a 25-year-old Christian college student from Nigeria, was stoned for saying Jesus by her classmates, who claimed she said something blasphemous against Muhammad. She was subsequently set on fire.
What was her crime? Blasphemy. Her classmates accused her of insulting Prophet Muhammad, and so they killed her. This incident has shocked the world, but in Nigeria, killing in the name of blasphemy has been taking place for far too long, especially in the country's north.
This is what many Christians in Nigeria experience daily. We may have a small voice, but we will continue to make you aware of the injustice Christians in Nigeria are facing.
Exactly.
Let's pray for our brothers and sisters in Nigeria, but also let's create more awareness about the persecution and suffering of Christians. Please help us spread biblical truth.
I'm going to leave a link in the description below to this reference, to this video in YouTube channel. You need to go and check them out. This is called Vision Unsealed. Great channel, and I follow them. Don't agree with everything they teach, of course, but there's a lot we can learn from different people of different faith as well. So you get the point of my argument here, right? What am I saying exactly is that we need to be talking more about this. Actually, there should not be a black hole about what is happening to brothers and sisters in the faith. I don't care what denomination they are part of. That's not the point. Jesus died for their sins as well as ours. And if I were in their place, I would want somebody to speak for me. You know, we live in a situation today in a culture where I think the weakness of the West has become a reason for more aggression against morality, Christians, or any group who once represents Christ and the gospel. Let me share with you what I mean here. How did President, there it is right here. So President Ronald Reagan said it this way: we maintain the peace through our strength, and weakness only invites aggression. That's a mouthful. And again, I am not advocating for wars and things like this, but when it comes to situations like this, you can't sugarcoat the matter. And why are they removing Nigeria from the list of particular concerns? What kind of backdoor deal is happening that they feel they need to do that and neglect these Christians while they're being persecuted? But you know what? God knows. God sees and God understands, and God is advocating for them. And we are hoping to use this platform while we can, while it is yet available to be used, so that we could make a difference talking about these things. Hell, here are a number of things I want to share with you. I want to bring this video to an end. I don't want to make this any longer than it needs to be. Number one, friends, I want to say this. 1 Peter is the text. Chapter 5, verse 8 and 9. Be sober, be vigilant. because your adversary, the devil, has a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. Whom resist ye steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same affliction are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. So guess what? We have further brethren in the world that are being afflicted by this roaring lion, that dragon in himself. You see, this is what's going on today. In Isaiah 63, verse 9, the devil knows the only way he can hurt God, he can break the heart of Christ, is by hurting his people. In all their affliction, God, he was afflicted. And we are told also that Satan knows that he has but a short time. And in Revelation chapter 12, if I'm not mistaken, verse 12, therefore rejoice you heaven and ye that dwell in them, and woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having what kind of wrath? Great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. But I'm so glad, friends, that God will take care of his people, as always. And that same old dragon, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, will eventually turn his ire and his wrath against the people of God, the remnant. The dragon was wroth with the woman, went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So we better brace ourselves. Brace ourselves. What is happening to them today, tomorrow may be our turn. Pray for these Christians, friends, and use the platform to make a difference regarding their lives. Pray for these families to find peace and comfort through these hard times as well. Advocate for them. You never know. When our turns come, we're going to need somebody to advocate for us. That's all I'm saying. Have a good one. Bye.